If you are a person who considers themselves to be a comic, graphic novel, or manga fan, it's probably safe to say you've picked up on the hefty debate taking place within this seemingly dying community. A conversation revolving around the supposed terminal demise of the Western comic and graphic novel industry and the meteoric rise of the manga industry. About how one manga series, Demon Slayer in particular, outsold all of the Western comic industry by itself. However, the truth is not so simple. This narrative, that of the comic industry's demise, is one that is steeped in a lot of uncertainty and misunderstandings. The numbers do look bad, at least from a surface level, but when you delve deeper into the facts on this issue, the waters become muddied. See, the comic industry has actually grown exponentially when factoring in the supposed rise of graphic novels. However, manga is counted in these numbers, so one might instinctually attribute this massive growth to manga, right? Well, that is partially true, but not the whole picture. See, manga has certainly grown in popularity, however, its share of the market still isn't anywhere close to that of the big two. But wait a second, how could one manga series outsell all of the Western comic industry and still not capture more than 5% of the market share? Is manga just that cheap? The answer is no, and the answer to how any of this is possible lies in the keyword series. Manga sales are recorded not by issue or volume, but by series, so if I buy volume 3 and 7 of Demon Slayer, now I've earned the Demon Slayer series 2 whole new sales. Contrarily, let's say I buy 3 Spider-Man comics. Each of those sales will be recorded separately from one another, so when all is said and done, those comics are going to look like they have much smaller numbers than Demon Slayer appears to. However, if we were to round up all of the Spider-Man comic sales and tie them together as one series, well, things start to get a little wacky. Comicstorian actually made an absolutely fantastic video about this, and I'll link to it below, but all this to say, the comic industry is not going anywhere anytime soon. However, I still can't help but feel deceived. I don't read anywhere near as many new comics nowadays as I used to, and I know plenty of people who agree with the sentiment that Western comics, especially those of the big two, aren't anywhere near as good or engaging as they used to be. So I guess the real question isn't why the comic industry is dying, but rather, why does it feel like it's dying? Well, I've taken a look at this sad state of affairs, and I think I've managed to surmise the truth behind the facts. And before you go labeling me as anything from either side of any political or idealistic spectrum, hear me out, because I'm not taking any political or idealistic stances here. This video is meant to be as objective as possible. We've already debunked one major misconception about the industry. Let's go ahead and see if we can't shed some light on another, starting with the most provocative and talked about aspect of the industry right off the bat. Woke comics. There is a lot of chatter about the quote-unquote woke American comics, about how the Western comic industry seems to be at the whim of an SJW community who seeks to put down traditional readers in the name of some hidden agenda. There is talk that the modern comic industry has put story and the narrative craft second in the name of pushing political or social messages. It's hard for me to really say how pertinent this issue is because I'm gonna be candid with you. I haven't read most of these presumably woke comics, and I'm not really the type of person to give an opinion on something I haven't read or experienced for myself. Indeed, I've found that many times in the past, the franchises or stories I initially had a bias against wound up being some of my favorites. I try to keep an open mind about stories I haven't read or experienced for myself because ultimately, I'm a firm believer that just about any story can be interesting and entertaining so long as it's told in a way that is, interesting or entertaining. In layman's terms, it's all up to execution, and good writers are good because they know how to execute. What I've learned in my years of exploring the narrative craft is simple, and this might be a controversial statement, but at this point, I don't care. People don't really care about whether a person is white, black, Hispanic, gay, straight, or transgender. People care about people. People care about compelling characters who've been written for a narratively rich reason. People care about good stories, and the riveting characters who drive them forward. It doesn't matter if a person is a specific race, or a specific gender, or a specific ethnicity. What matters is who they are. all that extra stuff is just fine, and people will accept any character you write so long as that character is engaging to them. With this in mind, it would appear that Marvel and DC have been creating characters for the sole purposes of representation. The thing is, this wouldn't really be a bad thing if the stories they produced were good, but they keep losing money and getting cancelled or delayed. Again, I haven't really read most of these comics, save for the few I'll comment on later in this video, so I'm not really trying to cast judgment on all of them. It's just that, well, usually good stories with huge brands behind them don't get cancelled. Follow me here for a second and see if this makes sense, okay? Good stories with this much name brand recognition behind them don't really play by the same rules as far as marketing and sales are concerned. Sure, as an independent publisher, I might write comics, and I might think they're good. Hell, they might actually be good. The truth is, I don't really know because not a lot of people are aware they even exist. Marketing and just getting my comic and characters into a person's head for more than 5 seconds is incredibly difficult, let alone getting them to read it, even if I am giving my comics away for free. It's hard to say whether the story is truly good or bad because not enough people have seen it yet. However, for comics and characters like Superman, the Joker, and Thor, the same issue just doesn't apply. These guys are recognizable at a glance, from Afghanistan to the middle of the fucking Amazon rainforest. Marketing these comics is child's play, relatively speaking, because everyone knows who they are and most comic readers have already spent hours reading content featuring these characters before. So when you have characters and IPs this powerful and this ingrained in the public psyche, if the comics and merchandise are getting cancelled, well, you tell me what you think that means. Now, look, it's not that I haven't read these comics because they turned a character gay or bisexual or anything like that. It isn't about female characters replacing male characters, and it isn't about any perceived social agenda or a political one either. In all honesty, I haven't read these works because they're competing with some of the most interesting and stylistically inspired new franchises, characters, and IPs that I've ever seen. And what's more is that they're doing so in a way that is just woefully unfriendly to both a diehard and casual audience. When I wake up and browse the web only to find news articles saying that I'm a bigot because I didn't like the new Star Wars movies, it makes me not want to watch literally anything Star Wars related ever again. Likewise, when I see the main arguments against criticisms of Western comics as, if you don't read and enjoy this, then you are racist or a bigot, it makes me not want to read your story because I feel that such an argument is just flat out disingenuous. There have been plenty of controversial comic runs in the past, like the Superior Spider-Man, which I made an entire video dedicated to. Dan Slott got death threats for his role in this run, but it's not like the team behind this project came out and said that you're ableist or racist or bigoted if you didn't like it. Instead, they just rolled out the series, and slowly what wound up being a fantastic story flipped the script and has now placed the Superior Spider-Man in the running for one of the best arcs in the character's history. Good stories will literally speak for themselves. Good stories are just hard to hate, and good characters are damn near impossible to turn away from. That's why even though Kevin Costner is a left-leaning independent, conservatives and liberals alike still watch and enjoy the conservative character he portrays in Yellowstone. People love, above all, good characters and compelling stories. If you have that, and you have some of the most recognizable faces in all of media, you're gonna do good sales numbers, and your stories aren't gonna get canceled. If you don't, well, you're gonna have a bad time. To be clear, I have read some of these quote-unquote woke comics. Ironheart, for example, was one that I wanted to read for a similar reason as the Superior Spider-Man. If you watched my video on that run, you might remember that I initially started reading it because I hated it and wanted to confirm my hatred as rational based on the quality of the comic, only to have the run blow my mind and convert me into a fan. Ironheart was kinda like the exact opposite. The comic, or at least the first volume, was really, really bad. Riri Williams is a complete Mary Sue. I mean, she's smarter and younger than Tony Stark or Peter Parker or any other super genius basically off the rip. Her backstory was painfully cliché, but most importantly, failed to ingrain the audience with a sense of loss at, well, her loss. And the dialogue was boring and filled with some of the most painful exposition dumps I've ever been subjected to. The issue, frankly, has nothing to do with her race or gender, The issue is with execution and character design. It's almost like the author wanted to just fast track through the entire beginning of the character's history. The issue is that when you do that, the foundation of the character gets skimped, and oftentimes, the foundation of a character is, well, the foundation. It serves as the ground on which all of the character's future actions, achievements, and failures will be built on. If you rush through it, then everything else that comes after feels cheap and unsteady. By the third issue, she's already beating the crap out of huge monsters and people like the Rhino. Meanwhile, we haven't seen her struggle once. We haven't seen any of her values be put to the test. We don't even really know why she wants to be a hero, aside from a tragedy that occurred at an early age, but even that doesn't necessarily connect the dots. Riri's stepdad and best friend were killed in a drive-by shooting, and because of that, now she wants to be a valiant hero who stands up for good? I don't know, her development into a hero is cut and dry and doesn't really make sense given who she shows herself to be. First, we're shown that she's a special youth, that she's a super genius and she needs to be watched over carefully because someone like her could easily become a serious problem for society if they're not cared for and raised well. Then, when her loved ones die, she understandably reacts pretty angrily and aggressively. She's also pretty damn arrogant and aloof given her super intelligence. I got the impression that she might have been more of a vigilante than a hero, especially given the fact that she doesn't seem to have many people in her life to guide her towards a more benevolent outlook on keeping the peace and societal justice in general. After the senseless violence that occurred in her youth and a lack of meaningful guidance, I would have imagined she would have retreated even further into her own head than she already was, and after such a terrible occurrence, I can easily see someone succumbing to dark thoughts and angry assumptions about the world. All of a sudden, her desire to take power and punishment into her own hands becomes understandable. We get why she wants to be a super-powered person. What doesn't make sense is that she's just never in the wrong. She's morally always right. Ironheart is the golden girl who is heroic seemingly for no reason other than because it's what's right. Why not have her start as a vigilante, fighting crime and delivering punishment in a way she sees fit, only to learn that the flaw in her actions stems from her arrogance and superintelligence? That her greatest gift is also a curse because it leads her to believe that she's better and smarter than the average man, and that as a result, she should be able to write the rules as she sees fit. Doing this would have grounded her in a sense of realism and relatability because most people can easily relate to how angry at the world a teenager would be after losing the people they care most for. We can all relate to a hurt person who wants to take the power back into their own hands, even if they're a bit overzealous in their execution of it. Then factor in a redemption arc where she comes face to face with the consequences of her own actions. Maybe she kills a criminal only to discover that that person's family is broken and that she's perpetuated the cycle she sought to shatter. Invincible's Titan is a great stand-in concept for this imaginary criminal character. In Invincible, we're introduced to Titan as a criminal who carries out various crimes to keep his family safe and his little girl medicated with the life-saving medicines she needs to survive. Now imagine Ironheart killed a criminal similar to Titan, or at least permanently wounded him, leaving him paralyzed or worse. Only to then look upon the face of his daughter, who takes in the scene of her own father being brutally beaten by a quote-unquote superhero. In the eyes of that child, in the reflection Riri sees in her own visor, Ironheart could see the error of her ways, and now, all of a sudden, you have a character who makes sense. A character we want to root for because we truly feel like we understand them, like they're a person with flaws, but also the motivation to change them and truly be a better person. But no, instead we get a character that conflicts with herself and as a result feels uncanny and unrelatable. Sure, she does cool things, but cool things don't mean jack shit if the character doing them doesn't intrigue or grip the audience. In fact, it actually detracts from the character because the audience doesn't feel like Ironheart deserves to do any of this stuff. She needs to be grounded in real-world problems. She needs to have flaws and shortcomings, and she seemingly has none. Even her social anxiety begins to fade almost immediately as she is talking normally with random people by the end of the first volume. Look, I don't want to make this an Ironheart video, but I've brought this all up for a reason. The issue with this character isn't necessarily with an agenda. The issue is with execution. If Ironheart was a compelling character with unique and relatable foils and skills, then the backlash for the character more likely than not would have been founded on bigotry and sexism, because at the end of the day, the character and story would have been good. But it isn't good, or at the very least, it is heavily debatable for reasons that have nothing to do with race or gender, as I've just painstakingly laid out. So yeah, woke or unwoke or whatever the hell you want to call it, the problem I'm seeing is in story, or more specifically in the lack of it. There's nothing wrong with wanting a diverse cast of characters that represents a wide group of human beings and unique experiences. Hell, that is in part what made comics great in the first place. However, there is a problem with shilling out bad stories and then calling anyone who points out the obvious flaws in them a bigot or a misogynist, regardless of what their criticisms actually are. The truth, as far as I can see it, is that these shoddy characters and stories exist in the name of tokenizing a minority to cash in off their hard-earned money. It's easy for a company to push out a quickly made bad story that features a diverse cast of characters, because then they can make their money and blame any criticisms on a quote toxic fan base. They are weaponizing morals in the name of making a quick buck without actually doing any of the hard work of telling good stories that are worth being told. And it should be an insult to all folks everywhere whenever their identity, race, or gender is used to cash a check. Contrary to what many will tell you, representation is not implicitly good. Good stories are good. Good stories with representation are industry defining. So if you are one of these tokenized minorities, I'd urge you to not be satisfied with whatever crockpot of shit any company throws at you because it shares your race, gender, or identity. Don't be satisfied with mediocrity because people tell you that you should be. You're not just a label, you aren't just a word or a group. Each and every one of you out there is a person with a unique experience, with a unique identity. And you deserve to be represented by creators and stories who actually have skill and passion for the narrative craft. I may not be white, but that has never stopped me from identifying with Luke Skywalker or Peter Parker. I may not be black, but that's never stopped me from identifying with Django or Miles Morales. Representation is so much more than race or gender, because at the end of the day, we are all human beings. When we die and our flesh returns to dust, all you see is a pile of bones, same as the one next to it. So be satisfied with a good story. Be satisfied with representation that has impact and magnetism. Be satisfied with quality, because that is what we all deserve to be represented by. The comic industry feels like it's dying because it's become a home for subpar stories, wild and flagrant accusations, and money-grubbing corporations who seek to do the bare minimum. It feels like it's dying because stories that used to enchant us no longer do. The faces we once loved have been replaced with those of uninteresting strangers. The biggest names in the industry feel tired and uninspired. The big two deserve a lot of the blame here. After all, it's their lack of leadership and blatant lack of care that has exacerbated this issue and killed much of what we once loved. But there's also a silver lining to all of this. And it's that independent publishers and brand new creators like myself are seeing the hunger and drive behind a new and growing customer base of people who not only like reading, but love reading comics, graphic novels, and manga. I do firmly believe that Marvel and DC are dying, that they are and will continue to lose out to the rest of the industry. These trends that we're seeing are only escalating, and I do predict the eventual demise of those at the top who demand the almighty dollar without earning it. But that doesn't mean the Western comic industry will go down with them. Our comic culture is resilient. It has survived far worse attempts at censorship, and at this point, feels like a firmly ingrained aspect of not just American culture, but Western culture in general. So be happy. This beloved art form of ours isn't going anywhere, and if we support creators, vote with our dollars, and spread positivity for the good rather than obsession over the bad, then I predict this next decade of comics will be the biggest and best of its kind to date. Thank you for watching. Leave a like and a comment down below because I love to hear what you guys have to say. So good, out.